Welcome to season 5 of What, Why, God. And in this season, we are asking the question, why not God? We have noticed that people are starting to come back to church. They are leaning into the question, why am I here? And why have I rejected going to church? I need to come back and find out a little bit more about it. And so we as a church need to start leaning back into them and answering some of their really good questions. And in this episode, I have Robert Beasley. He is a lawyer by trade. He's also an elder. He studies a lot of history. He's written a few books about the Bible, really knowledgeable about it. And I sent him a bunch of questions because you've been on before, and he just did such a wonderful job. And the one that he chose is, why should I know the history of Christianity in its entirety? And he wanted to take it from the perspective of the Bible, because the Bible is a history book. If you do any kind of digs or archaeological things, most historians will refer back to the Bible to see if it's been referenced in the Bible. And so it really is a history book. And so what I wanted to do is just basically start at the beginning of the book. And so give us your general idea of that.
Yeah, so, a lot of times people kind of have a vague or abstract idea of God, and usually God, their idea of God is kind of things that they've experienced or things they've heard about and so forth. But when you come to the Bible, God shows up.
Yeah.
He reveals who he is by actually acting within history.
Right.
And so we actually have God showing up and revealing himself to us. And we have the Old Testament and the New Testament, but the God of Jesus in the New Testament is the same God.
Right.
Of the Old Testament.
Yeah, because that's a really good point. A lot of people think, well, I'm reading the Old Testament. It doesn't seem like the God of the New Testament, and he's so judgmental and he's full of punishment. But he's really not.
That's right.
I've read through the Bible a few times, and I always feel a little bad for God, if that's a good way of putting it, because it just seems to be a recurring theme. And he's a God of compassion. And
absolutely.
And he saves them all the time. So
that's right.
And Jesus corrects this.
That's right.
Because he refers to the Old Testament quite a bit. So tell us what your thoughts are on all of that.
Yeah. So Jesus comes and says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Mm-hmm. And he calls God Father, even Abba, Father. Mm-hmm. But Jesus reveals who God is. But if you look at the Old Testament, and compare them, you'll see, well, Jesus is revealing really exactly that same God. And throughout the Old Testament, page after page, you will see a God full of compassion. In fact, when he reveals, Moses asked him, reveal your glory to me, all that you are. And he does by saying, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, full of mercy, slow to anger, full of mercy for thousands of generations. And the most repeated verse or phrase in the Bible is, the Lord is good. Mm-hmm. His steadfast love endures forever. Mm-hmm. Now, God gets angry in both the Old and the New Testament, but his anger is directed at those things that destroy us as humans.
That's exactly right.
In fact, because of that great love, and because God doesn't want us to destroy ourselves, he makes an unbreakable promise, which the Bible calls, throughout the Bible, the Old and the New, calls a covenant.
Right.
And God will do everything in his power to restore his creation.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people look for themselves in the Bible. Yeah. I've mentioned that before. It's not about us. It's about God.
That's right.
And it's about how God is for us.
That's right.
And not against us.
That's exactly right.
So expound on that a little bit.
So one philosopher said, if I can know how to act if I know what story I'm in. And that's true, because we all live by stories.
Yes.
And the Bible is the great meta-narrative, the great love story of God for humans. Right. And there's, we see that from the very beginning. Just a couple of things in Genesis. Number one, creation. We're not just random molecules. We have a purpose.
Right.
And creation reveals how intricately and craftsman-like God is in creating this good creation that we all enjoy, but also us humans. And Genesis says we, male and female, men and women, are made in the image and likeness of God. And that's unique. That concept in ancient Israel is unique among all the pagan religions, because the pagan religions said the king is in the image of God because the king is ruling everybody.
Or just a God.
Or,
I mean,
or
they
even
would
just
say
a God.
he is a God.
He is God's
he is God
representative.
themselves. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But in the Hebrew religion, every last human being is made in the image of God. And that is the foundation upon which our civilization, our Western civilization, is based, the dignity and worth of every individual.
Yeah.
And another beautiful thing that we see in Genesis right in the middle, right in the beginning, is God is a personal God. He's not a standoff, something up there that doesn't have any interest in us. He wants to be involved in our lives. He's personal.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And you also mentioned, a lot of people think about all the violence in the Old Testament. Speaking to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, so that is interesting. Where does that violence come from? So God created us as humans to image him, to represent him, to, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth and create culture, create good things. And when we look around, we see what a mess humans have made of this world. Here's another great quote. One scholar said, God doesn't need humans to be God, but humans need God to be human. Humans need God to be human, to tell us how to live, because otherwise we're going to make a mess of it. And that's a story of the garden, Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve said, we're going to do whatever we want. And so from Genesis 3 to Genesis 11, the world is filled with violence. And so God says, I'm going to restore the world. And he does that through Noah, who he makes a covenant with, that I will not destroy the world. And at the rainbow, and he again reaffirms that every human is made in the image of God, so there should be no murder. But then he makes a covenant with Abraham and Sarah. And through their descendants, he says, I will bless the whole world. And so then we see kind of the contrast between, the civilizations that are built up on violence, like Egypt, and this new alternative community that God is creating through Abraham, which is we call Israel. And so our great God leads little bitty Israel out of Egypt. And then he gives them two beautiful blessings, the blessing of the Torah, or the law. And the blessing of his presence. His spirit coming down in the tabernacle to go with the people. And so Israel is supposed to be this alternative community where, if you read Exodus and Leviticus, but especially Deuteronomy, you see where God says, defend the cause of the widows and orphans and the foreigners and treat people right.
Yeah, I think that was the beautiful thing, is that I know a lot of people do a nitpicky thing on the law and what God has said this and versus this. And one of them kind of struck me the other day as I was reading through it, because I'm going through the Bible again. And one of them, it says that a woman must depart for 7 days, and you can't sit on something that she's on. And I'm thinking, and I've heard people say, well, she's not allowed to be a part of anything while she's, on her moment of the month. And I thought, that's a blessing.
It is a blessing.
She doesn't have to do anything for a whole week.
Right.
And it just dawned on me, we're so like, that's not fair, when we're like, wait a minute, she shouldn't have to do anything for a whole week. And, and truly, any woman can tell you, if they sit on a chair and there's something that's not supposed to be there after they get off, you don't want anybody else sitting on it. So that's also another rule that says you shouldn't, you know what I mean? Because, and so I just thought, there's so much in that people like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. Well, if you really think about it, you think God's heart in it. And those are just, because people take it from it's a female, thing that, it's bad. No, I don't think God's saying it's bad.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And what about the Sabbath?
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of
The whole day.
Yeah. Take a day off. We're not workaholics. You don't have to worry.
Yeah.
God will provide.
Yeah. He just had so many great rules. And so, this is also great. And we know that Jesus came to save us.
Yeah.
And that he actually became the fulfillment of
That's
the
right.
law, because we tend to put guardrails up around our laws and say, okay, well, then you can't do it. And that almost becomes our God.
Yeah.
You're a bad person if you don't do that.
Yeah, that's true.
And he kind of changes things. So explain to us a little bit about how Jesus refers back to the Old Testament a lot, and how that all works out.
So that would have been great if Israel would have been that community. But unfortunately, Israel, time and time again, really became like all the other nations,
right,
and became very violent, didn't defend the cause of the widow. And you see that, the prophets coming again and again, and God warning and being patient with Israel, but warning that, if you don't change, my name is being defamed in all the world. Yeah. So I'm going to send you into exile. And eventually he did, to Babylon, the tribe of Judah, to Babylon. But he promised that he would restore them. He did finally bring them back, out of Babylon, but they continued to be subject to Persian rule, and then Greece rule, and Roman rule. But the prophets continue to promise this. They said God himself would return. You see this in Isaiah, Zechariah, and Ezekiel, that God himself will return and rescue humanity and be king over all the world, actually. And he would pour out his Spirit to move us to be able to do the things that are good and right and caring for other people. And so I think you and I had talked about before, is that when the Old Testament ends, there's about 400 years where there's silence. There's nothing. And during this time, Israel was subject to Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then all of a sudden, Jesus of Nazareth shows up and says, the time is here. The kingdom of God has come.
Right.
And the king himself has come, because Jesus makes out, incredible claims. And he even says that I am replacing the temple. The temple, the place where the Israelites brought their sacrifice for forgiveness of sins. Jesus says, destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days, which he will. But so so Jesus comes and displays, for all of us to see exactly what Israel was supposed to be in a kingdom that is not like the kingdoms they wanted. It's not a political kingdom. It's a kingdom where Jesus says, love your enemies. And it's a kingdom that's not a political kingdom, because Rome is not really the enemy. The enemy is inside all of us. And Jesus does really, just to kind of narrow it down, he does two great things. He reveals to us the heart of who God is. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father, is what Jesus said. But he also reveals who we are, who we should be, that we are supposed to image God. And the clearest picture of who God is that we see is Jesus deliberately, sacrificially going to the cross and suffering for us. And then suffering with us. God himself experiencing the pain that we have.
He truly is a fulfillment of the Old Testament.
Yes, in every way.
Everything that in the Old Testament God is saying, this is what I want you to do, he tells us, but they never really understood the heart of it. And Jesus always refers back to that sort of stuff. And then he says, that's me. He even says it to the people that he grew up with, right? Or, and he said, this has just been fulfilled today in your presence. And they wanted to stone him. And so, it's like, and yet the wickedness of inside people will not be expelled unless we have Jesus. So let's finish that whole story.
So Jesus himself had said this, but then his followers, through the Spirit, especially Paul, said this. What Jesus was doing on the cross was he was God himself taking all of the blame
Yeah.
and accusation upon himself so that we could be free from that and return fully and confidently,
Yeah.
understanding how much the depth of God's love for us, so we can run to the Father.
Yeah.
And so, we don't have any shame or guilt or fear, because, as Paul said, if God is for us, who can be against
Yeah.
us?
Yeah.
And that would be a beautiful love story, but it's not over
Right.
because Jesus rose
Yeah.
from the
He
dead,
didn't stay dead.
which it affirms everything that Jesus said about God and about who he was and about us as humans too.
Yeah.
And so then Jesus ascends,
Right.
which is something we don't talk about very much, but it's very important because that means that Jesus, still bearing our marks in his flesh, is at the right hand of the Father, meaning, as he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So now the story begins, essentially. And just like in the Old Testament, where God brings his Spirit down in the tabernacle and in the temple, in the book of Acts we see
Right.
God, as he promised, pouring out his Spirit, his own presence
Yeah.
among us in his church, in
Yeah.
Jesus'
And all
church.
of his people. We see it occasionally in the Old Testament, when he came upon some of the leaders, the elders of the tribes,
true,
right?
true.
And they were all prophesying, but most of the time, even Moses, he only spoke to Moses, and directly that we know of.
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful picture to see that now Jesus has given us the opportunity to have the Spirit in with us
Absolutely.
all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Moses going in, and seeing God. And,
Yeah.
Paul picks up on this in 2 Corinthians, where, Moses would go in and be in the presence of God, and he would come out and his face was just glowing.
Yeah.
And he would put a veil on his
Yeah.
face. But Paul picks up on that in 2 Corinthians, where he talks about how in Jesus the veil has been removed.
Yeah.
So all of us
Yeah.
can go into the presence of God.
Yeah.
And the reason being we go into the presence of God is not only to experience his love for us, acceptance for us, but also to change us continually. As Paul says, we are being transformed
Yes.
from one degree of glory to another. Sorry.
It's beautiful.
But we are being transformed from one degree of glory into the same image as Jesus.
Yeah.
God is transforming us to become like
image of
Jesus.
him.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful is that the old song that kids sing, they'll know we're Christians by our love.
That's right.
And
that's what Jesus said.
Sometimes when you meet somebody, no matter where it is, you could be in an airport, you could be in a grocery store. Sometimes you meet somebody, and the way your interaction is with them, they're a Christian.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you.
You just know it. You know that they exude it. It's like a presence around. It is a presence. It is God that is surrounding them all the time. So yeah, it's a beautiful story. And
the story gets even better because Jesus is the first fruits of a life forever. So his body, his transformed body, is our guarantee that we too will have transformed bodies. And we will, I was going to say something. We often think, we will go to heaven when we die and we will be in the presence of the Lord. But Christianity is not about going to heaven, because actually the story of Christianity is heaven will come down to earth and God will renew the earth.
Yeah.
And so God's not done with us. He's not done with earth. If you look back over the last 2,000 years, you see that.
Yeah.
The transformation.
I was just reading something about that, and I'd never thought about it. And I can't remember the exact name of the book, so I won't say it, but I'll put it in the link. But basically, it was talking about how humans are physical and spiritual. We are both.
That's right.
And our bodies will be renewed, our physical bodies. We will have our physical bodies back in the way that God originally envisioned them to be or wanted them to be
Right,
with
right.
our spirit. And the reason I wanted to
right.
mention that is he said, one of the reasons that we get freaked out or creeped out by ghostly things is for us, it's unnatural.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And
yeah.
I thought, well, I'd never thought of it that way
Yeah.
because we consider ourselves as physical but spiritual as well. So when it's torn apart, it's unnatural.
That's right. Yeah.
And I just thought, I'd never thought of that way. And you just made me think of that just now, and that, yeah, heaven will come down and our real bodies will be glorified
Yeah.
and far better. And they won't, as we get older, disintegrate. They'll just continue to be great.
No more arthritis.
No more arthritis or whatever it is
or
that
whatever
you have.
it is. That's right. No more death and no
Yes.
more sorrow.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful thing to look
That's a
forward to.
beautiful thing, yeah.
It's a beautiful thing to look
Yeah.
forward to. Well, thank you so much for all of this. This
Oh,
has
my
been
pleasure. No,
really
this is wonderful.
fantastic. And so I really hope that you enjoyed seeing the history and the future of Christianity through the Bible. We're hearing a lot about it. And I want to know, do you know it? Do you spend some time in your Bible? Because the best way to get to know God is to read your Bible. And I would say read it with somebody. Get some really good commentaries. Be in a group so that you can have a discussion, because it is confusing, you know, and you have to understand the language, and different translations are important too. And it really is a history book, but it's also just a book about God and what he had planned for you. And so each time you read it too, you learn more. At least I know I have. The other thing I wanted to mention is I know a lot of people mention that Christianity, you know, has been bad for society. I would disagree. And I would say that after Jesus came and Christians started to spread throughout the world, we've made some remarkable impact on our history that we know of. And I would suggest that you look at Why You Think the Way You Do by Dr. Glenn Sunshine. I have that right here. That kind of takes the story after the New Testament and what happens after the New Testament, if you're really interested in learning more about the history of our great God. Well, thank you once again. And thank you for joining us. Remember to always ask questions. Be available to be a good listener. Remember, you can always say, I'm not sure about something. Let me check into that and I'll get back to you. We just want to be good stewards. We want to be image bearers. We want to reflect God to other people whenever we're speaking to them. So thank you so much for being with us today. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.